1. Our essential nature and its apparent failing. Ask yourself the question, what is it that knows or is aware of my experience? By experience, in this context, we mean the mind, the body, and the world. All we experience of the mind are thoughts and images. All we experience of the body, if our eyes are closed, are sensations. And all we experience of the world are perceptions. That is, sights, sounds, tastes, textures, and smells. What is it that is aware of all of these? Go to whatever it is that knows or is aware of your experience. What is that? What is it that is aware of your current thought? Whatever that thought might be. It doesn't matter what the thought is. What is it that is aware of whatever sound is appearing to you right now? The sight of your room, if your eyes are open. The tingling sensation called my face, hands, or feet. All of these are being known or experienced. We know them. We are aware of them. How come? With what? Just as the sun, relatively speaking, illuminates the objects of nature, rendering them visible, so this something that we call I illuminates all experience, making it knowable. Whatever it is that is aware of our thoughts and images is obviously not itself made out of a thought or an image. The thought or image appears. We are aware of it, and then it disappears. And I, whatever it is that knows or is aware of that thought or image, remains behind, aware of the next thought, sensation, or perception. The thought vanishes, but I don't. Don't follow me with your thoughts. Follow me in your experience. This is not about non-dual philosophy. It is about the nature of experience. And the only way to discover the true nature of experience is to explore experience itself. Whatever it is that is aware of bodily sensations, such as the tingling of our face or feet, is obviously not itself made out of a sensation. Sensations appear, evolve, and disappear. But I, the one that knows or is aware of these sensations, doesn't appear, evolve, or disappear with it. The sensation comes and goes. I remain present. So it is obvious that I, whatever exactly I am, cannot be made out of an intermittent sensation. And likewise all sights, sounds, tastes, textures, and smells appear and disappear. But I remain behind. None of these go into the make of me. So the first thing we discover, if we refer only to our direct, intimate experience of ourself, and refrain from referring to the past or to thought, is that what I am is not made out of a thought, feeling, sensation, or perception. What else can we know for certain about this I from direct experience? We know for certain that I am present and aware. If I wasn't present, I wouldn't be able to hear or read these words. And likewise, if I wasn't aware, I would not be aware of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. So it is an undoubtable, self-evident truth that what we essentially are, what I essentially am, is both present and aware. These two qualities, apparently two, are inseparable from myself, inherent in myself, being and aware, or being and knowing. It is for this reason that I is sometimes referred to as awareness. The suffix ness means the presence of. So the word awareness simply means the presence of that which is aware. I is the common name we give to this aware presence. In this exploration of our experience, we don't suddenly become this aware presence. We just notice, oh yes, of course, I am not a thought, a feeling, a sensation, a perception, or a mixture of these. All these have been coming and going all my life. But I am the one that is ever present and aware of all these passing objects. We don't suddenly become this aware presence. We just notice that that is what we already and always are. So instead of considering yourself to be a thought, feeling, sensation, perception, or a mixture of these, that is, a mind and a body, feel and know yourself to be this aware presence. Our culture has educated and conditioned us to believe and subsequently feel that this aware presence that I am is identical to a cluster of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. That is, identical to the mind and the body. As a result of this imaginary identification, the simple knowing of our own being, its knowing of itself, is apparently veiled and thus seems to lose its true identity, and to become instead a collection of objects. Thus, the awareness that I am seems to become a body and a mind. In other words, we overlook, or rather thought overlooks or forgets, this simple knowing of our own being, its knowing of itself, and imagines instead that what we essentially are is a cluster of temporary, limited thoughts and feelings. The belief and subsequent feeling that what I essentially am is made out of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions veils the self that I truly am, and replaces it with an imaginary self, a thought and feeling made self. Most people spend their entire lives serving the fears and demands of this imaginary self. This belief and feeling that what I am is identical to the temporary and limited appearances of the mind and body is ultimately responsible for the unhappiness in our lives and for the conflict we experience in ourself and between people, families, communities, and nations. And just as the original cause of unhappiness is the overlooking, veiling, or forgetting of our true self, so the ultimate cure for this unhappiness is to explore what we are and come to know ourself again as it truly is, the awareness in which all thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions appear, with which they are known, and, ultimately, out of which they are made. What else can we know for certain about ourselves? We know for certain that I am, and that the I that I am is not just present, but also aware. That is self-evident and beyond doubt. Now, see if you can find a limit to the one that is aware of your experience. If we turn our attention towards the content of our experience, that is, towards thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, we find that they are all obviously limited. They begin and end. They come and go. Now try turning your attention to whatever it is that knows or is aware of your experience. Don't think about this. Really try to do it. Turn your attention towards whatever it is that is aware of your current thought, feeling, sensation, or perception. Where do you turn? In which direction do you go? each direction seems to be the wrong direction. Each direction is always towards an object, but never towards that which is aware of that object. It's like standing up and trying to take a step towards ourself. We just can't do it. And the reason we can't turn our attention towards ourself is because ourself is not any kind of object. We can only turn our attention towards something, even a very subtle something, like a feeling or a thought. But ourself, this aware presence, is not any kind of thing. In that sense, it is sometimes said to be nothing, not a thing, empty. That is, empty of apparent objects, like empty space. It's not a space, but it is like empty space, in the sense that it is inherently empty. Now, can you find an edge to this aware space? Don't think about this. This is not philosophy. Go there in your experience. Can you find a limit, a border, or an edge to whatever it is that knows or is aware of your experience? A place where it starts or stops? See clearly that any kind of edge or border that we might come across would be some kind of object that we were perceiving. We are the one that knows or is aware of that perceived object, but cannot ourself be known or perceived. In other words, what we perceive or know is not what we are. It is what we are aware of. Now, having seen that everything we know or are aware of has a limit, go back again and try to find a limit to what you essentially are. Don't ask thought what it has to say about the matter. Thought will say that you are limited, that you are a man or a woman, that you are a body of a certain weight, color, and height, that you have an age, that you are growing old, etc. Ask the one that truly knows yourself. The one that knows or is aware of yourself is yourself, awareness itself. It is the only one that is in a position to know about itself. Ask yourself, awareness, do I know or experience any limit in myself? Do I find a limit, a border, or an edge to myself? In this way, discover in your actual experience that we find a limit to the body, the mind, and the world, but not to ourself. This is the first great discovery to be made about ourself. What I essentially am has no limits. Awareness has no knowledge of any limit within itself. And now ask yourself a second question. Do I ever experience myself coming and going? Again, don't ask thought what it thinks. Thought will say, yes, you are always appearing and disappearing. You fall asleep, you wake up, you were born, and you will die. Don't refer to thought. Ask yourself whether it has any knowledge, that is, any experience, of its own appearance or disappearance. If we really ask this question, simply and honestly of ourself, we come to a startling but simple conclusion. No, I, awareness, have never experienced myself appearing or disappearing. I have no knowledge or experience of myself falling asleep or waking up, being born or dying. Thoughts, feelings, sensations and perceptions appear and disappear in me, but I don't appear and disappear with them. This is the second great discovery to be made about ourself. What I essentially am is ever present. These two discoveries are the greatest discoveries that anyone can make about themselves. I am unlimited and ever present, infinite and eternal. However, this is not some extraordinary new discovery, some extraordinary new experience. In fact, it is not an experience. It is the revelation of the ever-present but apparently overlooked or forgotten nature of ourself. It is like noticing the ever-present screen while looking at the changing image in the movie. Instead of being lost in the drama of the movie, which is a collection of objects that come and go, we notice the screen that never comes and goes. The objects in the image have limits and destinies. They appear and disappear. They come and go. But the screen on which they appear, and ultimately out of which they are made, doesn't share their limits or their destiny. When the character in the movie travels around the world, the screen doesn't go with it. Seeing the screen is not a new experience. We are always seeing it, but usually without realizing it. The screen doesn't appear in the movie. It's not part of the movie. Nevertheless, it is its unlimited, ever-present reality. Likewise, this discovery that what I am is without limits and ever-present is not a marvelous new experience or event. It is not even an experience. Rather, it is the revelation of the unlimited and ever-present nature of our essential self. Now, this revelation may have a dramatic impact on the mind and the body, or it may pass almost unnoticed to begin with. However, if they arise, these colourful, dramatic effects are not the real, transparent revelation of our true nature. They are just the side effects in the mind and the body. The revelation of our true nature is itself not an experience. It is transparent, colourless. The mind is not party to this revelation. The common name for this revelation is enlightenment or awakening. But in most cases, we mistake enlightenment or awakening for an exotic experience in the mind or the body. As such, we imagine that enlightenment is some extraordinary event that 1 in a million people have, if they're lucky, after 30 years of spiritual practice. However, enlightenment is not an event. It is not an experience. It's simply the knowing of our own being as it is, its knowing of itself, without limits and ever present. What I essentially am doesn't share the limits or the destiny of the mind and body. Far from being an exotic experience, this is the simplest, most obvious, ordinary knowing of our own being that all 7 billion of us know intimately, although mostly without realizing it. In fact, it is precisely because it is so simple, familiar, ordinary, and intimate, that in almost all cases, this simple knowing of our own being, its knowing of itself, is overlooked or forgotten. And as a result of this overlooking of ourself, we believe and feel that our essential nature is a cluster of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. With this belief, the true and only I of awareness is seemingly veiled, and an imaginary self comes into apparent existence. This imaginary self consists of awareness plus a belief and a feeling that it, awareness, shares the limits and the destiny of the mind and body. This limited, temporary self never actually comes into existence, but only seems to, from the illusory point of view of that thought or feeling. In other words, this imaginary self is only such from its own limited and distorted point of view. For the real and only self of awareness, which is the only one that truly knows about itself, it is never truly limited, nor does it appear or disappear. Having apparently forgotten their true nature, most people's lives are spent serving this imaginary self, thinking, feeling, acting, perceiving and relating on its behalf. Because this imaginary self is made only of the thoughts and feelings that apparently limit awareness to a mind and a body, it is a fragile entity, always needing to maintain itself. However, the true and only I of awareness needs no maintenance. It is simply ever present in its own experience of itself, and thus not the slightest effort is required to be it or maintain it. In contrast, the imaginary separate self requires constant maintenance, a constant activity of thinking or feeling. In fact, the separate self is not really an entity as such. It is an activity of thinking and feeling. The separate self is not what we are. It is what thoughts and feelings do. Now, go back to yourself and ask, can I ever be disturbed? Don't ask if thoughts or feelings can be disturbed. We well know that they are disturbed at the slightest provocation. Ask yourself, do I, awareness, ever have any experience of myself becoming disturbed? It's like asking empty space if it is ever agitated. See clearly that what you essentially are simply cannot be disturbed, however agitated the mind, body, or world may be. You, I, the one in whom this agitation appears, with which it is known, and, ultimately, out of which it is made, are not yourself agitated by it. Just as the empty space of your room would not be moved if you stood up, and started dancing or fighting. In other words, undisturbable peace, which is independent of circumstances, is our inherent and ever-present nature. Now, if we ask ourselves if our own being can ever lack anything, the answer is the same. The mind may lack something. The body may lack something. The world may lack something. But you, I, this open, empty presence of awareness, knows no lack within itself. It is always fulfilled, simply by being itself. As such, fulfillment, or happiness, is its ever-present nature. Thus, peace and happiness, in all circumstances and under all conditions, are two ever-present qualities of ourself. In this way, when the imaginary self comes into apparent existence, the true and only I of awareness is seemingly veiled, and, along with it, so is its innate peace and happiness. It is for this reason that the poet Henry David Thoreau said, "Most men lead lives of quiet desperation." Once the imaginary self has come into apparent existence, the innate peace and happiness that is the simple knowing of our own being is apparently veiled. As a result, this imaginary self leaves the now, where awareness eternally resides, and ventures out into a past or a future, seeking an object that will reinstate this lost peace and happiness. Such is the fate of the imaginary self, to be forever escaping the now in favor of a past or future where it hopes to find an object, situation, or relationship that will provide the peace and happiness for which it longs. But as we all know only too well, the separate self is never satisfied. It is always frustrated. It never finds what it wants. No sooner does it find what it wants than it no longer wants it. And off it goes again in the never-ending search for peace and happiness in a non-existent future. However, it never finds and will never find what it seeks, because it is looking in the wrong direction. At some stage, having been failed sufficiently often, by the objects that are on offer in the realm of the mind, body, and world. We turn around and question the one who is in search. However, when we turn our attention towards that one, we don't actually find a temporary, limited, seeking self. We find this open, empty, undisturbable, and naturally fulfilled presence of awareness. It finds or recognizes itself, ever present, unlimited, and without agitation or lack. That discovery is the experience of peace and happiness for which the imaginary self was in search. However, the imaginary self can never find or have the experience of peace and happiness for which it longs, because its apparent presence is the veiling of it. In other words, the separate self seeks peace and happiness like a moth seeks a flame. The flame is all the moth wants, but the one thing it cannot have. Peace and happiness is all the separate self longs for, but the one thing it cannot have. As the moth touches the flame for which it longs, it dies. That is its way of knowing the flame, by dying into it, by becoming it. Likewise, that is the way the imaginary self discovers what it longs for, by dying into it. The imaginary self can never have or know peace and happiness. It can only die or dissolve. And that dissolution is the experience of peace and happiness. All we have ever truly longed for in life resides in the simple knowing of our own being, as it truly is. And this is available 24/7 to all 7 billion of us. It is never totally veiled, just as the blackest image never totally veils the screen. Thus, even our darkest feelings never truly veil the light of awareness in which they appear, with which they are known, and out of which they are made. All that is needed is to look at our experience and to have the courage to live the implications of what we find. Because this understanding was often, at least until recently, couched in the cultural packaging of India, China, Tibet, or other Far Eastern cultures. It tended to acquire the extraordinary, exotic flavors of those cultures. However, there is nothing extraordinary or exotic about the simple knowing of our own being as it is. India, China, and Tibet may be extraordinary and exotic, but the simple knowing of our own being, its knowing of itself, as this unlimited, unborn, undying presence, is the most simple, most obvious, most ordinary understanding. so obvious that it is, in almost all cases, overlooked or forgotten. We don't suddenly become unlimited or ever-present. We just notice that this is what we eternally are. We realize that we have been hypnotized by the prevailing attitudes of our culture into believing that our essential nature shares the limits and the destiny of the body-mind. The exotic name for this understanding is enlightenment or awakening. But due to the association of these words with extraordinary, colorful experiences in the body and the mind, this simple knowing of our own being, its simple knowing of itself, has been mistaken for an extraordinary experience in the body-mind, a kind of super experience, the ultimate experience in the body-mind. We believe that if we meditate for long enough, or practice hard enough, we may eventually have the experience of enlightenment. And as a result, we go off and undertake all kinds of practices, hoping that if we're sincere enough, devoted enough, we go to our teacher or to India often enough, we sit on our mat for long enough, whatever it is that we do, we will eventually get this extraordinary experience called enlightenment. However, enlightenment is not an experience. Awakening is not an experience in the mind or the body. It is the simple knowing of our own being as it is. It is the recognition of our ever-present and unlimited nature. This recognition may trigger a deep relaxation in the mind and the body, where some tensions or knots are relaxed. And this relaxation may send waves of energy temporarily pulsing through the body and the mind. That is exotic. That may feel wonderful for a few minutes, a few hours, or a few weeks. But that is just a temporary side effect and is usually mistaken for enlightenment. Enlightenment itself is colorless. It is transparent. It doesn't appear in the mind. It cannot be noticed by the mind. What can be noticed by the mind are these extraordinary, colorful events. Books can be written about things like that. And then we read such books about these extraordinary events and think, that never happened to me. Therefore, I have to venture out again into the future, seeking this kind of experience. But that is a misunderstanding. Awakening or enlightenment is not an experience. It doesn't appear in the body-mind. In fact, in some cases, the effect on the body-mind is almost imperceptible to begin with. In fact, there may be no signs in the body-mind for some time. It can be that quiet. Just an, oh yes, of course. Why didn't I notice that before? So this simple recognition of our own being, its recognition or remembrance of itself, profoundly changes the way we think and, in time, the way we feel about ourselves. It liberates us, truly liberates us from the belief and feeling that what we are is a cluster of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. It doesn't stop the thoughts, feelings, and sensations from appearing, but it puts an end to the belief that I am those thoughts, feelings, and sensations. For some time, they may continue to appear out of habit, running on their old momentum. We have been thinking, feeling, acting, perceiving, and relating on behalf of a separate, limited self for several decades, and these thoughts, feelings, activities, etc., are not going to come to an end overnight. They carry on, but no longer fueled by the belief that they refer to something that is true or real. They soon begin to wind down and eventually peter out. In their place, we begin to think, feel, act, perceive, and relate on behalf of the self that we now know and feel ourselves to be. We no longer do so on behalf of a separate, limited, imaginary self, a self that is made out of a mind and a body. And in time, this new understanding begins to pervade all realms of our life. Not just the way we think, but the way we feel. And not just the way we feel, but the way we perceive the world, the way we sense the body, and the way we relate with others. It transforms experience from the inside out. So in our meditations and contemplations, we will explore this whole territory. We will explore the conventional belief and feeling that what I am is a self, made out of a body and a mind. We will discover again and again that what I am is made out of pure, empty, transparent awareness. We'll keep exploring awareness, awareness's experience of itself, to discover in the intimacy of our own experience that we have no real knowledge of any limit or destiny within ourself. That is, that awareness has no real knowledge or experience of any such limitation or destiny within itself. We will explore how this experiential understanding has an impact on the way we feel the body, the way we relate with one another, and the way we perceive the world. However, so-called enlightenment, this transparent non-event called enlightenment, is just a halfway stage. We shouldn't make too much of it. There is a never-ending process after so-called awakening, in which the body, the mind, and the world are gradually colonized by this experiential understanding. They are progressively saturated in, or transfigured by, the light of awareness. That is a never-ending process. We can never say it has come to an end. the separate self comes to an end, or rather, the imaginary separate self comes to an end. But the deepening of this understanding in our lives, the colonization of the entire realm of experience with this new understanding, never comes to an end. It goes on and on, deepening forever. Thank you.